Hi there, welcome to your Wednesday work. We're going to use our Wednesday work this week to talk about a couple of interesting congressional phenomena. Two of them, while they are two separate concepts, you'll see how they tend to go hand in hand. Two separate concepts, but the reason why each of these concepts exists is quite similar. And then one last quick note of a new concept right at the end of our discussion here. So the first thing I want to talk about are these two separate concepts that seem to have the same causes. And those concepts are the fact that it is very difficult to beat a congressional incumbent and a concept called the sophomore surge. An incumbent is somebody that is currently holding that political position. So for example, in the 2020 presidential election, President Donald Trump is the incumbent candidate. That is one way that we might refer to him as a candidate. The sophomore surge, let's go ahead and get to our next slide. We're including this chart here. Notice that within the past 10 years, the congressional approval rating has not reached higher than 30%. So as an institution, people aren't very pleased with Congress, yet it's really difficult to beat a congressional incumbent, and the sophomore surge exists. We don't seem to be pleased with Congress as an institution, but we are electing the same people to Congress over and over again. So let's take a look at why it's so difficult to beat a congressional incumbent, and also why this is an increase in the votes congressional candidates usually get when they first run for re-election. That is a very convoluted definition, so let's break it down. Let's say that you are a member of Congress and you have won your election for the first time and you have served your first term, and then you go to run for re-election again. Statistically, what tends to happen is that second time you are running for election, or another way of saying that is the first time you are running for re-election, statistically there is often, especially in the House of Representatives, a significant increase in the amount of votes that you receive. So you've already held that office, you are the incumbent candidate, you are running for re-election for the first time. In the House of Representatives, there tends to be an 8 to 10% increase in the amount of votes that the incumbent candidate receives. So the sophomore surge and the fact that it is very difficult to beat a congressional incumbent, technically two separate concepts, but a lot of the same reasoning behind them. My reason sophomore surge exists. Here are our main reasons. First of all, members of Congress have something called franking privileges, and that means that as a member of Congress, you can send mail for free. Essentially, you don't have to pay for stamps. You are not allowed to use your franking privileges to campaign. That would be a violation of campaign finance law. It would be a big no-no. So as a member of Congress running for re-election, you absolutely cannot use your franking privileges to send out campaign materials to your constituents. But as a member of Congress, you can use your franking privileges to keep your constituents informed. And what if you happen to be informing them about something wonderful that you've just done, or great changes that have come to your legislative district? You're technically not using your franking privileges to campaign, but that is certainly going to bode well for you. So the fact that members of Congress can communicate directly with the constituents using franking privileges, that is a benefit that their challenger is not going to have. And that makes it very difficult to beat a congressional incumbent. And it also helps to explain why the sophomore surge exists. Let's take a look at another reason why those things tend to happen. Members of Congress need to be in Washington, D.C. to participate in debates and votes and committee work, but members of Congress often are taking frequent trips home. They're going to events. I'm sure this has changed a lot post-COVID, but members of Congress are going to farmers markets and they're going to even school events. We've had a member of Congress come visit us at school within the past 5 years. So they're making frequent trips home. They're visible within their community, and that's going to bode well for them as a candidate. Members of Congress tend to have easier access to radio and television than their challenger does. Now, of course, this is going to depend on who the challenger is. If the challenger is someone that is locally famous or is otherwise really well known, then the incumbent would have less of an advantage there. But congressional incumbents, because they are the member of Congress, are probably going to have easier access to radio and television than their challenger will. Members of Congress have offices set up in their home state and in their home district, and those offices are there to field questions from their constituents and provide services to their constituents. If we were to look up, and if you're interested, feel free to look up Representative Connor Lamb's offices. He has multiple offices within his legislative district. Senator Pat Toomey and Senator Bob Casey have offices all throughout the state. And again, they use those offices to provide services to their constituents. Lastly, then, many members of Congress will condemn the institution, or maybe condemn's probably too harsh of a word, but they will be openly critical of the institution of Congress while they themselves are running for it. So they'll say, oh, we get it. Congress is a mess right now. You should elect me or continue to elect me because I'm going to fix it. Obviously, there's some sort of disconnect because, as we've said, congressional approval rating hasn't reached 30% in a decade, but we keep electing the same people over and over again. But that argument must be working for them. This argument that they aren't the problem, that they are going to go to Washington, D.C., or I should say stay in Washington, D.C. to fix that problem. So all of these are reasons why it's so tough to beat a congressional incumbent. They can use their offices to provide services to their constituents. They are probably more visible than their challenger. They have franking privileges. They can run against the very institution they are trying to be a part of. All of these reasons make it really difficult to beat a congressional incumbent. All of these reasons help to explain why the sophomore surge exists. All right, last quick convo. Some people will claim that members of Congress are not getting along with one another as well as they used to. There's arguments for that. There's arguments that prove that that might not be true. There is some talk amongst political scientists that there seems to be less camaraderie in Congress, meaning less friendships within Congress. There's all of these tales of the good old days where they would duke it out on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate and then go smoke a cigar together as friends later. And some political scientists say that there's less of that. Now, what I've posted on this slide are some examples of how there really was no good old days in terms of members of Congress getting along. Here's 2 examples where physical violence has broken out between members of Congress. So it's probably an oversimplification to say that members of Congress just aren't getting along with one another as well as they used to. There's always been problems with members of Congress getting along with one another, and heated debate kind of spilling over into their lack of potential for friendship. But political scientists seem to be noticing some increased tension between members of Congress. Let's talk about why that may be. Okay, one reason is something that we've already spent a bit of time talking about, and that is the fact that political elites are participating in midterm elections. Voter turnout in midterm elections is very low. The type of people that participate in midterm elections would be considered by many to be political elites. We know that political elites are more ideologically extreme than the average person, and they are probably picking more ideologically extreme members of Congress. So, low voter turnout in midterm elections is leading to ideologically extreme Republicans in Congress, ideologically extreme Democrats in Congress, and perhaps less potential for them to get along with one another as a result. We talked earlier this week about gerrymandered districts, where a political party will draw legislative district lines in a way that makes it difficult for the opposing party to win. And so as a result of gerrymandered districts, some legislative districts are becoming what is called increasingly safe. They're called safe districts, where the incumbent is winning by very large margins. That frees the incumbent up to become more ideologically extreme. If the district is gerrymandered, and as a result, that person or the party that for which the district has been gerrymandered feels safe and feels like they cannot be defeated, that does free that person up to become more ideologically extreme. So some political scientists argue that the increase in gerrymandered districts has created very safe districts that has allowed the incumbent candidate or the incumbent party to become very extreme in its beliefs. Adding to the potential problem of gerrymandered districts, and it's only a problem if you think it is, but the potential impact of gerrymandered districts is the fact that a lot of leadership roles in Congress are based on seniority, meaning the longer you're there, the more powerful you become. The longer you're there, the higher the chances are that you're going to be given a leadership position. That might mean that people holding leadership positions in Congress are coming from these very safe districts. They are winning election after election. They've been there for a while. They feel free to become more ideologically extreme. And so perhaps people in leadership positions in Congress have become more ideologically extreme over the years. Last two things are getting a little bit more complex, and we'll spend more time talking about these in different contexts throughout the year. The South of the United States seems to be, since at least the 1950s, taking its more conservative social beliefs and aligning those beliefs with the Republican Party. Without getting into a whole conversation of post-Civil War politics, there used to be a larger representation of Democrats in the South. And post-Civil War, those Democrats still had more conservative social values, yet they were voting Democrat. And so what that was leading to are some Democrats in Congress that were more conservative in their social beliefs and more moderate on the political spectrum. As the South has shifted its allegiance to the Republican Party to better align with those conservative social beliefs, that has reduced the number of moderate Democrats in Congress. It has reduced the number of socially conservative Democrats in Congress. And if that's not something that a couple of minutes of explanation just now made sense to you, don't worry, because we'll talk more about that later in the year. Same thing with this last bullet point. When we talk about our two-party system later in the year, we will talk about the impact of factional parties. Factional parties are minor parties that break away from a major party and then run against that party. The likely effect is that that factional party candidate is going to take votes away from the party from which it left. So let's say that a factional party breaks off from the Republicans and runs against them in the next election. That factional party is going to pull votes from the Republican Party to the benefit of the Democratic Party. So both Republicans and Democrats want to prevent factional parties. They do not want people to leave, run against them, and then cost them votes. And so in order to prevent a faction from breaking off, both the Republican and Democratic parties will become more ideologically extreme to try to appease those factions. Don't leave, don't run against us and cost us votes. Instead, we will adopt some of those more ideologically extreme beliefs. And we could give examples of both the Republicans and Democrats doing that within the past 5 years. I'm sure you're brainstorming some examples right now. So perhaps A fear of factional parties has led Republicans and Democrats to become more ideologically extreme and has made it more difficult for members of Congress to get along with one another as a result. Here is our Wednesday assignment that's going to ask you to reflect on these concepts. I'm going to create an assignment in Wednesday's folder that's going to ask you to explain the impact of just one of the bullet points that we've talked about today. So take the one that you feel you have the best understanding of, and please, in your own words, explain it back to me. So for example, if you want to explain to me why some political scientists think gerrymandered districts have decreased friendships in Congress, then that's what you'll do. If you want to explain to me how franking privileges leads to the sophomore surge, then that's the one that you're going to pick. And then as a review together, we're going to talk about these things on Thursday. And I can't wait to hear some of these explanations in your own words as you've written about them in your Wednesday work. So there's lots of choice involved in Wednesday work. You're picking what you feel most comfortable with. You're completing it prior to 2 p.m. so that I can take accurate attendance. And you are going to rest assured that we're going to talk about all of these concepts together, either through review in the next couple of days or as they become a part of our larger conversation in other chapters. For example, the factional party conversation and the shifting allegiance of the South conversation. Please reach out to me via email if you need anything, and have yourselves a lovely Wednesday.